March 1943. Major General George Patton walks into a tomb of American ambition. At Kasserine Pass, the pride of the United States Army lay shattered by Erwin Rommel's veterans, leaving Eisenhower with a catastrophic choice. Find a man who can kill the rot or lose North Africa entirely. Patton's arrival marks the start of a ruthless leadership purge where a single missing helmet could end a 20-year career forever. The desert wind carries the scent of burning oil and the bitter taste of a humiliating defeat as the sun rises over Tunisia on March 6, 1943. Major General George S. Patton Jr. steps out of his vehicle and into the headquarters of the United States Second Corps with the weight of a dying campaign on his shoulders. The corridors are silent, filled with the shuffling uncertainty of officers who know they have failed their country and their men. The atmosphere is heavy with the stench of defeat, a thick fog of despair that Patton intends to burn away with pure, unadulterated aggression. He stands before them as a living monument of military discipline, wearing a polished helmet and ivory-handled revolvers that signal a new, terrifying era of leadership. By the end of his first day, the professional lives of multiple officers will be extinguished. Within a week, dozens more will follow them into the professional abyss. Patton was sent to North Africa for one reason: to fix a disaster that had exposed the American military as an amateur force on the world stage. Just weeks earlier, the American Army had suffered the most devastating ground defeat it had ever experienced in the North African theater. At a place called Kasserine Pass, an entire division had been routed, leaving behind a trail of abandoned equipment and broken spirits. Images of American soldiers surrendering with their hands behind their heads were being broadcast worldwide, serving as a propaganda masterpiece for the Axis powers. Dwight D. Eisenhower had given Patton a mission that seemed nearly impossible. He must restore order, he must restore discipline, and he must rebuild the fighting spirit of an army that had been utterly shattered. What followed was a leadership purge so ruthless and so sudden that the Second Corps would become unrecognizable in just 10 days. Patton would fire men for cowardice, for incompetence, or simply for failing to wear their helmets properly during a crisis. He intended to transform a demoralized mob into a lethal fighting force by making every officer more terrified of him than they were of the Germans. The roots of this catastrophe reach back to February 14, 1943, when German forces under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel launched Operation Frühlingswind against Green American positions. The United States had been on the ground in North Africa for only 3 months, and the majority of these soldiers had never heard a shot fired in anger. Their officers were graduates of textbooks and training camps, men who had never commanded troops under the soul-crushing pressure of real combat. They were facing the Wehrmacht, battle-hardened veterans who had spent 2 years perfecting the art of desert warfare. By February 15th, the situation turned into a full-scale slaughter. Young men from the heartland of America, who had been told they were the finest soldiers on earth, were now discarding their rifles so they could run faster away from the German tanks. The collapse was not merely a failure of the soldiers, it was a total systemic breakdown of command. On February 19th, Rommel sent his panzer division screaming through the Kasserine Pass, and within hours the American defense vanished. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, the man responsible for the sector, was commanding the battle from a bunker 70 miles behind the front lines. While his men were dying in the dust, Fredendall was unable to coordinate a single effective response because he literally did not know where his own units were located. Instead of taking responsibility, he spent his time blaming subordinates for failures that were born from his own cowardice and poor planning. By the time the battle ended on February 24th, over 6,000 Americans were casualties. The losses were staggering, with the 168th Infantry Regiment losing 2,000 men and the 1st Armored Division seeing 183 of its tanks turned into smoldering scrap metal. Hundreds of Americans were captured and paraded before German cameras, providing the world with proof that the American giant was actually a weakling. British commanders began to openly question if the Americans were even capable of fighting effectively, while the German High Command concluded that American troops were poorly led and easily defeated. The prestige of the United States was at its lowest point in the war, and Eisenhower knew that immediate, violent change was the only solution. He looked to George S. Patton Jr., a 57-year-old veteran who had written the very manuals on armored warfare. Patton was a man who believed that discipline under pressure was the only thing that separated winning armies from losing ones. He did not believe the American soldier was inferior to the German. He believed they were simply being led by men who were too soft for the realities of modern war. Eisenhower understood that Patton was a brilliant trainer, but he also knew the man was a predator when it came to incompetence. On March 6, 1943, the order was signed. Fredendall was out and Patton was in. His instructions were brief and brutal. Fix the Corps, make them fight, and do it with lightning speed. The change began within hours of Patton's arrival at headquarters. He issued a directive that sounded superficial to his critics, but was actually a psychological masterstroke. Every soldier, regardless of rank, would wear their helmet and full combat gear at all times. The first victim of this new regime was an officer sitting at his desk, who was fired before he could even stand up because he wasn't wearing his helmet. Patton told him to pack his bags and report to the rear immediately, ending 20 years of military service in a single sentence. Within 24 hours, the entire headquarters staff looked like they were standing for a combat inspection, and the culture of laziness was replaced by a culture of fear. But Patton didn't stop at the headquarters. He took his fury directly to the front lines. On March 7th, he began driving to the forward positions to see which officers were leading and which were hiding. At one battalion headquarters, he found the commanding officer missing, having retreated to a safer position in the rear. Patton relieved him on the spot and told his replacement that if he didn't know his positions by the next morning, he would be the next one sent home in disgrace. Just like that, the words spread through the desert like wildfire. Patton is coming, and he is taking no prisoners. At another position, Patton discovered a company commander who had placed his command post 500 yards behind his men so he could coordinate communications. Patton's response was immediate and biting. A leader belongs with his lead elements, seeing what they see, or he cannot lead at all. The officer was relieved and sent to the rear, joined by dozens of others over the next 3 days who failed to meet Patton's standards of tactical awareness. The general fired officers who couldn't answer questions about their situation and those whose defensive lines were poorly organized, making it clear that performance was the only currency he accepted. The impact on the ranks was profound and immediate. While many officers lived in a state of constant terror, the ordinary soldiers began to feel a surge of energy because they saw that the leaders who had failed them at Kasserine were finally being held accountable. Patton was teaching a harsh lesson that defeat has personal consequences, and he was making sure every man understood those consequences personally. He was not just firing men, he was rebuilding the very foundations of how the American Army operated in the field. Beyond the personnel changes, Patton began an intensive period of tactical retraining to fix the errors that led to the Kasserine disaster. He threw out the defensive tank doctrine and demanded that armor be used for aggressive maneuver and rapid exploitation. He ordered that artillery missions be delivered in minutes rather than hours, demanding a level of coordination that the Second Corps had never seen. He forced infantry and tank units to practice together daily because he knew that the panic at Kasserine had been caused by soldiers who didn't know how to fight alongside their own armor. The message was clear. American forces would no longer sit in holes in the ground waiting to be hit by the Germans. They would attack first, they would attack hard, and they would keep attacking until the enemy was broken. Patton's confidence was infectious, and he spent his days projecting an image of absolute certainty that the American soldier was the most dangerous creature on the battlefield. He gave profane, high-energy speeches that shocked some but energized the men who had been depressed and uncertain after their recent defeat. Eisenhower watched from afar as the Second Corps transformed into a sharp professional tool. He had sent Major General Omar Bradley to serve as a special observer, and Bradley's accurate reports had paved the way for Patton's appointment. Now Patton made Bradley his deputy commander, creating a partnership that would define American victory in Europe. Bradley handled the complex staff work while Patton focused on the soul of the Army, identifying and promoting the few officers who had actually fought well during the Kasserine disaster. These promoted officers became Patton's new corps, men who had maintained discipline under pressure and kept their troops fighting even when the situation was desperate. This created a new meritocracy where competence was the only path to survival and promotion. If you fought well, Patton would reward you. If you showed the slightest hint of cowardice or hesitation, you were gone. By March 15th, the command structure was entirely different, with corps staff replaced and battalion commanders constantly under the microscope. Patton's final preparation was psychological, as he worked to make the American soldier stop thinking of himself as a victim of Rommel and start thinking of himself as a predator. He used every tool at his disposal, from theatrical inspections to nightly patrols that initiated contact with the Germans, building small victories that slowly repaired the Army's shattered ego. German intelligence reports from that month began to reflect a change, describing the Americans as more aggressive and better coordinated than ever before. Patton had achieved his goal. In just 10 days, he had rebuilt the Second Corps from the ashes of Kasserine Pass and was now ready to launch an offensive toward the town of El Guettar. The psychological architecture of the Second Corps was being rebuilt brick by brick, but the true structural integrity of Patton's new creation could only be tested in the crucible of a full-scale offensive. On March 17, 1943, at precisely 5:30 in the morning, the silence of the Tunisian dawn was shattered by the thunderous roar of American artillery. For 30 minutes, a coordinated barrage rained down on German positions near El Guettar, signaling to the Wehrmacht that the era of American hesitation had come to a violent end. As the smoke cleared, the 1st Infantry Division, the very same troops who had endured the humiliation of Kasserine Pass only weeks prior, surged forward with a newfound ferocity that stunned their adversaries. They were no longer a disjointed mob of frightened civilians in uniform. They were executing the aggressive, high-speed tactics Patton had drilled into their collective consciousness during his 10-day metamorphosis of the Corps. By noon on that first day of the assault, the American forces had carved their way 6 miles into enemy territory, successfully capturing the town of El Guettar ahead of the most optimistic schedules. This rapid success was the direct result of Patton's insistence on speed and his refusal to allow commanders to sit in defensive posture while waiting to be attacked. However, the real trial arrived on March 23rd, when the German High Command, refusing to concede the initiative, launched a massive armored counterattack. This was the moment of truth that would determine if Patton's reforms were merely superficial or if he had truly forged a new heart for the American Army. German panzer forces roared toward the American lines with the same terrifying confidence they had displayed at Kasserine, but this time the reception was fundamentally different. Instead of the panic and routing that had defined the previous month, the American artillery responded with devastating precision, destroying the first wave of German tanks before they could even close the distance. Anti-tank guns engaged the remaining armor at point-blank range, while the infantry, once prone to flight, stood their ground with a grim determination that shocked the veteran German crews. When the dust settled, over 30 German tanks lay smoldering on the desert floor, and the vaunted Axis counterattack had been stopped cold. The psychological wounds of Kasserine began to heal in the heat of this victory, validating Patton's brutal methods and proving that the American soldier could not only stand against the Wehrmacht, but could defeat them in a head-on collision. While the soldiers fought the Germans in the desert, Patton continued his internal war against what he perceived as the rot of incompetent leadership. The Purge did not end with the first week. It became a permanent feature of the Second Corps culture, where rank offered no shield against the general's wrath. Major General Orlando Ward, the commander of the 1st Armored Division, found himself under the same unforgiving scrutiny as the lowliest lieutenant. On April 5, 1943, even after the success at El Guettar, Patton relieved Ward of his command, sending a shockwave through the upper echelons of the military. It was a clear demonstration that in Patton's army, past prestige meant nothing if current performance did not meet his exacting, aggressive standards. The human cost of this relentless pursuit of excellence was staggering and deeply personal for the dozens of officers who saw their careers evaporate in an instant. Many of these men were not cowards, but rather competent administrators or decent patriots who simply lacked the specific, predatory instinct required for frontline combat leadership. Patton made no distinction between a good man and a good commander. If an officer could not provide the aggressive leadership the moment demanded, they were removed without hesitation. These men were often reassigned quietly to training commands or staff positions back in the United States, their dreams of combat glory ending in the middle of the night as they packed their footlockers to face a lifetime of haunting questions. This cold efficiency protected the institution of the Army by removing inadequate leaders, but it did so by breaking the hearts and ending the professional lives of individuals who had given decades of service. This relief culture, initiated by Patton in North Africa, would go on to shape American military doctrine for the remainder of the 20th century. It created an environment where officers competed fiercely to prove their aggression, knowing that failure to lead effectively would result in immediate disgrace. While the British Army tended to reassign failed commanders more gently, the American approach became one of rapid, public accountability. This created a more adaptable and ruthless force, but it also fostered a high-pressure atmosphere where the fear of the sack was a constant companion to the fear of the enemy. Patton believed this was the only way to save the lives of the many, by sacrificing the careers of the few who could not measure up to the demands of modern war. The transformation was not just about who was fired, but who was elevated to take their place. Patton's partnership with Omar Bradley proved to be one of the most effective command duos in military history, balancing Patton's fiery tactical genius with Bradley's methodical staff coordination. Bradley, who had been an observer during the Kasserine disaster, was promoted to command the Second Corps when Patton was reassigned on April 15, 1943, to prepare for the invasion of Sicily. Bradley maintained the standards Patton had established, ensuring that the culture of discipline and aggression was not a temporary flash in the pan, but a permanent shift in the Corps' DNA. The divisions that had been routed and humiliated at Kasserine emerged from the North African campaign as battle-hardened, veteran units with excellent combat records. They had learned that military courtesy, sharp uniforms, and rigid discipline were not just for show. They were the external manifestations of an internal professional pride that won battles. Patton had used showmanship and profanity to shock these men out of their lethargy, but the results were undeniable. By the time the North African campaign concluded in May 1943, the American Army had proven to itself, to its allies, and to its enemies that it was a force to be reckoned with. Patton's journey would continue through the rugged terrain of Sicily and the hedgerows of France, where he would eventually command the Third Army and become the most celebrated ground commander of the war. Yet the shadow of the North African Purge followed him, remaining a point of intense controversy among military historians and the officer corps. Some argued his methods were unnecessarily cruel, while others maintained that without his intervention, the American Army might have taken years to reach the level of proficiency he demanded in 10 days. Ironically, the very system of accountability Patton helped forge would eventually be turned against him in 1945, when he was removed from command for his outspoken and controversial political statements. The legacy of the Second Corps in North Africa remains a study in the power of transformative leadership. In the span of 40 days, Patton took a command that was fractured, demoralized, and defeated, and turned it into a weapon of precision and power. The statistics of the conflict tell the story with brutal clarity. At Kasserine Pass, the Corps was routed. At El Guettar, it stood its ground and triumphed. The only variable that had changed significantly in that short window was the man at the top and the culture of accountability he enforced with an iron fist. As the American soldiers moved on to the beaches of Sicily and the mountains of Italy, they carried with them the lessons learned in the Tunisian dust. They understood that in war, performance is the only metric that matters, and that the lives of thousands depend on the competence of the few who lead them. Patton had saved the army by breaking its heart, demanding a level of excellence that few thought possible until he forced them to achieve it. He had finally made the American soldier believe they were a force worth fighting for, and more importantly, a force capable of winning. The story of Patton in North Africa is not just a tale of tactical shifts or military hardware. It is a profound exploration of human psychology under the most extreme pressure imaginable. It reveals how a single individual, through sheer force of will and an uncompromising standard of discipline, can alter the trajectory of a global conflict. Patton understood that an army is a living organism, and like any organism, it must be purged of its weaknesses if it is to survive in a hostile environment. His ruthlessness was not born of malice, but of a deep-seated conviction that the quickest way to end a war was to fight it with a level of aggression that left the enemy no room to breathe. Ultimately, the officers who survived Patton's tenure in North Africa became the backbone of the force that would eventually liberate Europe. They were men who had seen the abyss at Kasserine and the triumph at El Guettar, and they knew exactly what it took to bridge that gap. They carried Patton's blood and guts philosophy into every subsequent engagement, ensuring that the American military would never again be viewed as an amateur force by its adversaries. The Purge was a painful, often tragic necessity that stripped away the illusions of peacetime soldiering and replaced them with the cold, hard realities of modern combat. As we look back at the maps of Tunisia and the reports of relieved commanders, we see the blueprint of the modern American military. The insistence on leadership accountability, the integration of all arms of combat, and the relentless pursuit of the initiative are all hallmarks of the Patton era. He was a man out of time, a romantic warrior who used the most modern tools of destruction to enforce ancient principles of discipline and courage. His success in North Africa was the foundation upon which the victories in Western Europe were built, proving that while hardware is important, it is the spirit and the leadership of the men behind the machines that truly decide the fate of nations. The silence that Patton first encountered in the hallways of the Second Corps headquarters was eventually replaced by the roar of engines and the confident shouts of men who knew their purpose. He had taken a shattered command and given it a soul, transforming a group of individuals into a singular, lethal entity. The cost was high, the methods were brutal, and the man himself was often unbearable. But the results changed the course of World War II. George S. Patton Jr. did not just fix a disaster in North Africa, he reinvented the American way of war. Patton believed that sacrificing the careers of the few was necessary to save the lives of the many. Do you think his ruthless method of firing officers for minor infractions was a brilliant tactical necessity, or was it an unfair destruction of patriotic men? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.